Hi everybody, I'm Amy, this is Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer, and we review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about the mechanics and Maggie is all about the theme. Today, this is a preview for Castellans of Valeria by Isaías Vallejo. Now please note that this is an unpaid preview, but all of the components that we'll be showing you are prototype, and the rule set and the game components are all subject to change.
So in Castellans of Valeria, we find ourselves in the city of Kosk, which is the westmost city in the world of Valeria. And it's got a new duke. And so the dukes decided to put us up against each other to see who can prove themselves to be the best city developer. And so we're going to try and harvest different resources so that we can build manors and temples and even ships so we can have a healthy trade going around and even recruit citizens. All of this so that we can help influence the different guilds, and all of these things are going to give us points, and whoever has the most points by the end of the game will be the winner.
So this game is all about area control. You can see on the board there are 6 different districts in this city, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to control each of those districts by building the buildings and different types of things that we have on our player board. At the end of the 5 rounds, different districts are going to score according to the image that's shown around the round marker. You can see in round 5, all of the districts will score one last time. So there's a staggered scoring that has you keeping your eye on different districts at different times. What's really cool about this game is that each of the buildings interact slightly differently with the districts. So some of the buildings, like these little manors, when you build them, you are going to get influence in the guilds that are shown in that district. So the symbol shown here, I would go up on each of these tracks, and at the end of the game, you want to be as high on these tracks as possible, because the higher up you are in the ranking on each of these tracks, the more victory points you're going to get. However, some of the other building types, like for example a ship, they're just going to give you control points and influence the area control game, but they're not going to give you any influence. So you have to think carefully about what you're building where. And one of my favorites is the windmill, because you can build that on roads and it contributes half a point to each of the districts either side, which might help to break a tie. So that's what you're trying to get done, but how are you doing that? Well, through dice drafting, because in this game we're going to have 3 dice per player as well as 3 left over, and in the first round of the game we're going to be drafting die one at a time, and when you take one of them you also get the resource that's depicted on top of them, so as an instant benefit, and then everyone is going to draft all the dice until we have 3 left over, and then we move into the action round. Now in the action round we use the same turn order, and this time you are choosing one of these dice to activate to do one of the actions on your player board. And the cool thing is that any die can activate any action, but if you match the die face with the bonus die that's shown on that action, you get additional resources that you weren't expecting, which can make things cheaper to build. As you build things off your player board, you also get to unlock fun things as well. So when you release a new mana, it's going to give you an ongoing ability that's going to give you some bonuses. This one, for example, you need to move this mana and crate so that your gold can increase past the point of 6, which you want to do, because the main use of gold is to build these really fancy monuments. And when you build these monuments, you get to put them in different places around the board, and they don't give you control. But what they do is give you victory points every round, no matter which region is scoring, for other elements that are on the board. So for example, this monument will give you points for every manor that's located in the district every round, and this monument will give you points for every person that is in each of the adjacent districts every round. Now, there's a couple of other things you can get done in this game, and I won't go into them in too much detail, but you can use these crates to buy and sell different types of resources. Or you can use food to recruit the help of these citizens, which are going to either give you instant benefits or really cool benefits that will help you along the way, such as changing the face of different dice. So now we'll talk about how we felt about playing this game. And the first thing, just because I just spoke about it, one of the elements I really like in this game are the differences between each of the buildings. And the decision space that goes along with that.
I really like how they all obviously behave differently. So the way the resources for building them is different. But then also you have the manor, all of the different manors that you build, they unlock an ongoing ability, which essentially just makes some of the other actions more powerful. So that can be a nice little guessing game. Then the temples give you that super boost of that influence with the guilds.
Yeah, because the temples give you twice the influence of the guilds than manors do. So temples, they use stone to be built, and they're going to give you this boost on these different tracks.
Yeah. And with the people, when you're actually, they're not really a building, but when you're recruiting those people, that's when you get the chance to kind of look at what are those cards and what are the things that I could sort of get my hands on, which serve a double purpose. Well, one, obviously you're going to get the ability on that card. They also can be a great way of getting some of that like more influence in one of those guilds, so you can kind of keep your eye out and go, oh, that's a relatively easy way for me to make sure that I go up on that track. But then also you'll get an influence for one of the guilds of wherever you end up placing that citizen.
But I really like, for example, the windmill, which contributes half to each district. And then there's this nice decision between building monuments and where you build those as well. Because monuments, they don't give you any control, but they do give you ongoing victory points. And so you want to build them as early as possible, but you want to build them in the place where they score for a particular type of building or people. And you don't know that early in the game because you don't know where people are going to build. And as soon as I say, okay, I'm building this here and that's going to score me for people, well, no one's going to put any people in those districts because they don't want me to score.
Yeah.
So I like that element of the game.
I also like that there's only 3 monuments, so you kind of have to really choose wisely where you go.
And they're expensive.
Yeah, and they're quite expensive. So yeah, that's an interesting tension.
And I didn't mention this, but the boats are really fun because you can build them, but then in subsequent turns you can pay 2 coins and move them to any other region. So the boat can move, which means that when the scoring changes, you can, jump on over to a different location.
Your influence around. That can be so annoying. Yeah, but it can be so annoying when you've got like a very, very delicate balance of influence, and then someone's like, I'm going to move my boat.
On my last turn, I'm going to move my boat around and take your points from you. The other thing about how these score are these little green buildings that you can see on camera here. These are basically a placeholder
neutral player.
An NPC that is taking control over different districts that we only use in solo 2 or 3 player games. They basically just, we roll this die at the end of every round and we add one of these to the region. And it's just acting as competition for any players that are in those districts.
The other area that's quite interesting is these the guild tracks, because you have this thing where if for example Amy's here and I'm here, and if I end up moving one, you don't just move one and go next to it. You get to bunny hop if they're like immediately in front of you, which in a multiplayer game, particularly when there's several in a row, like that can be quite advantageous. That can be quite bad. So like that becomes quite a fun little kind of almost mini game where you're like, oh, are they running too far away and I'm not going to be able to bunny hop, or they're right in front of me, which will make it really satisfying for me to jump over. Yeah.
And so that does dictate, where you place things, because you're thinking about, well, actually I want to go up on that track while everyone's aligned and I can bunny hop them.
Yeah.
So I should build over there where I can get that kind of influence. But what's also interesting is when you're in the lead on these tracks and you don't want, them to be able to leverage to be bunny hopped, you're like, well, maybe I'll go up on that just to create, Maggie could create a bit of space so that I can't bunny hop. So that's an interesting dynamic, and I really enjoy these tracks. I also like the little bonuses you get along the way. Whenever you cross one of these lines, you'll get coins, extra resource, and then towards the end of the tracks, you get victory points. So that's the area control component and the tracks. But then also there's all of these citizen cards. And I found them to be a little bit uninspiring in terms of myself wanting to use them. There's a little bit of bias there. I generally don't like reading cards, and so I'm not inclined to use them. But even when I force myself to use them, I think what's interesting about them is that they use food as a resource, and so you need to, get food in order to get these citizens. But then you also want to build them early on because a lot of them are going to give you ongoing benefits through the game. However, I feel like focusing on them early in the game is going to mean that you're not releasing as many manners, which give you ongoing benefits on your player board.
Which can be quite powerful.
And the temples, you're not going to be building as many temples, and it's important early on to start moving up these tracks and stay in line with everybody and that bunny hopping race. And temples are a great way to do that because they give you double points on those tracks. So I haven't found a game where I've been able to leverage them and feel like they've contributed to my win.
I will agree in that I found that I didn't mind so much the reading of the cards because I really appreciate that there's no text in them. It's just the iconography, and you can fairly, like, the iconography is actually pretty good. So you can pretty much decipher, okay, what benefit am I going to get? But yeah, I agree that the powers within those were never compelling enough to make me forego anything else. So sometimes even when you're getting something that's going to help you throughout the game. So, for example, a lot of them give you the ability of changing the face of a die to something else, which you might go, oh, okay, so if I'm going to go very, very strong on this particular, for example, if I want to build a lot of manners and I have something that allows me to change the face of a die to wood, which is what you need for that, it's like, that's going to be excellent early on. But then I found that even when I was trying to do that, I didn't end up using them as much to really, so, and that could be just, sort of like a preference of a play, like the way that I kind of play the game. But yeah, I kind of agree that a lot of the times we just found ourselves not really partaking in the cards.
But sometimes cards can be overpowered as well, and so people will like the fact that it's not like you get this random card and you're completely overpowering other players. It's not like that at all. In fact, you can definitely win without the cards, but if you're someone that loves cards, maybe that's going to be your strategy.
I will say, I do wish there were some cards that gave you some end game additional points, because that was something that I felt was missing. I'd sometimes really enjoy having that, I've built a lot of these things, and that card now is looking really, really enticing. And then you having a bit of a secret points at the end. That felt like a bit of a missed opportunity.
And now Maggie mentioned iconography on the cards. I also want to say that the iconography throughout the rest of the game is super clear. And I really appreciate it in particular on the player board, because there are a lot of choices that are available to you. The building of different buildings cost different amounts. There's secondary actions that you can take. There's a lot going on, but once you've learnt the iconography, it's very clear and very easy to remember the rules, so much so that you don't need to refer back to the rule book, and that is fantastic. Also, on the board itself, we have a reminder of not only the points that will be scored when a region is scored, but also the amount of control that the different buildings contribute, which is really useful.
Another thing that I really appreciated was with the dice drafting and this sort of synergy between the not just obviously when you're drafting that dice, you're getting that resource, but then you have the potential comboing of, if I use, for example, the green influence die face as the activating die when I take these, like the trading action, then I get a bonus influence. And the same with all of the different areas. They all have a matching die face that gives you a bonus, usually the resource that you need in that space. So it can be quite interesting to, as you're, depending on what you're planning to do next round, you're looking at, okay, well, what am I going to try and draft? And sometimes the other way around, if you go, oh, the things that I was wanting didn't come out, so what is there that I can then kind of make more of? So like, if only magic came out, which magic is actually, we haven't even spoken about. Magic is a really interesting resource, because what it does is it allows you to enhance pretty much any of the other resources. So as long as you have, for example,
starting wild, as long as you're pairing it with that
exactly,
resource.
So that can be a really interesting thing in and of itself.
Yeah, I really like the dice as well. I like that it's not so restrictive that you can only do certain actions with certain dice, because you can use any of the dice, but then you get that nice added bonus, which always feels good.
Yeah.
And now just a couple of other things to mention about this game in no particular order. One thing that I would love to see improved in this game, and this is a prototype, it might have changed, the monuments are exactly the same colour as all of the rest of your buildings. And I wish there was a way that this could be, for example, white, but then with purple screen printing or something, so you could still identify that it was mine. But then you could quickly look at a district and know not to include those in the area control portion of the scoring, because it does get quite cumbersome when you play with 4 or 5 players.
From 3 onwards, it starts getting quite busy as a board.
It gets very busy. There's a lot of things going on, and there's these the statues are actually in the middle of the district, and it just looks like one of the control elements. And so being able to look at a region and quickly decipher what's a monument and what contributes to control, having that visual representation would be really helpful.
It would streamline the scoring, which can be one of the things that's really kind of slows the game down.
Yes.
All those interim scoring.
Yeah, in fact, we played it at all different player counts, and we found that 2 players, you can play this game in an hour.
Yeah.
And actually, a 2-player game is quite good considering this is area control, which is normally not the realm of a two-player game. So it's quite a good competition between the two of us when we're playing. Obviously, the more players you have, the more interesting the area control becomes, especially when you're giving out first, second, and third player points in the scoring, but the game also becomes a lot longer. And we found that 3+ players, I think it's actually pushing the 90 minutes on the box.
Well beyond that.
4 or 5 players, it's a much longer game because at the end of every round you're doing this scoring and cleanup, and when there's more going on, it just takes a little while. Also, when people are doing their actions and then they have the option of a secondary action, anytime there's an option of a secondary action, or then you're going to build a monument, there's always this like cognitive load that slows the game down a little bit. So it is a little bit longer probably than what it says on the box.
I will talk a little bit about the solo mode because it does come with a solo, and it's quite a complex sort of solo in the sense that you have 6 different, well, it's an automa, but 6 different characters. So you have 3 on the one side of these cards and then 3 on the other. And essentially, so for example, you'd pick, whatever card you want, and you'll be using these 2 different cards. One of them you're going to be rolling the dice a fair bit. And depending on, so for example, if it's going to be placing a manor or building a manor and it's round 1, it's going to tell you in round 1, depending on where what the die ended up, the roll ended up being, these are the different areas where it's going to be placing. But then each one of the automa cards will tell you the preference for their drafting, and then for each one of the rounds, what are going to be their actions. So I found that, it gives you, they're actually quite different in terms of the strategy the automa takes. I personally just found that I don't really tend to enjoy playing with automas that are fairly complex to run, and in the sense that, not that it's complex to run because it kind of tells you what you're doing, but it's enough of having to facilitate the turn and doing this and then rolling a dice for it and then moving its elements around and giving it influence, giving it points, that then by the time I come back to my turn, I'm like, what was I even doing? I have no idea. So I don't tend to resonate very much with automas like this, but that's very much a personal kind of style. That does mean that you do have someone to compete against. So it's not just a beat your own score, which is what I do tend to prefer, but for people that prefer this type of automa, then you have a fair bit of choice for that.
And finally, some of you might be thinking, how does this game compare to other Valeria games? Well, unfortunately, we've only played one other, which is Shadow Kingdoms of Valeria, which did leave our collection. One of the problems that I had with that was this first player turn advantage in a situation where there were race objectives. That's something that would frustrate me if I was last in turn order and it wasn't really compensated for enough. In this game, there is a bit of compensation for the first player advantage in that the last player gets to choose the bonus that they're going to start with first and the region they're going to start in. But do note that there are 5 rounds and that doesn't change depending on how many players you're playing with. So in a 4-player game, well, one person is going to get to go first in the dice draft twice. So that's just an interesting dynamic. It didn't really seem like it influenced the outcome too much. And for my preference, I really enjoy the way the area control works in this game. So this one is definitely preferred for me.
I will agree. I really did enjoy the area control. Because I don't tend to enjoy area control as much because it tends to be very confrontational. But with this one, I think there's so much richness in terms of like the points and the influence and all the other things that you're unlocking that I was actually quite taken by just this sort of puzzle. So it almost felt like,
it doesn't feel super aggressive.
No, it doesn't. So it's like, even though you're kind of doing that area control and that sort of competition, which means that you're paying enough attention to the state of other people's game on the board, I felt like I was still also quite invested in my own kind of multiplayer solitaire puzzle with how am I going to unlock my buildings, which ones am I going to use, and also over different games I can try different strategies. I can try and go manor strong or temple strong and see kind of what happens. So I actually really enjoyed that with this game.
We hope you found this video useful in terms of trying to work out whether this game is right for you or not. If you are interested in backing this game, check out the campaign details in our description below. If you liked the video, please hit like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye!